Hello and welcome to the Guitar Hang Podcast. I am your host, John Stankorb. My guest today is a true master of taste, tone, and storytelling on the guitar, Adam Levy. Adam has worked with an incredible range of artists from Tracy Chapman to Norah Jones to Amos Lee and many more, always bringing a signature blend of jazz, blues, and folk to his playing. Beyond his work as a sought-after guitarist, Adam is also a dedicated educator, sharing his deep musical insight through lessons, books, and now his brand new audiobook, String Theories. It's my honor to welcome Adam Levy to the show. I'm excited to hear a little bit more about how the String Theory project came to fruition. That's a very exciting topic for an audiobook. I love the way that you teach. There's been so many things that you've said about jazz and the way one perceives jazz, the way that one story that struck me as really interesting was you're talking about when you're starting to play in small ensembles and you would bring the jazz book, the real book with you and realize I don't need all this information and I'm not connecting. So I don't want to take up too much of the air in the room, but yeah, I'd like to hear about that and some other things about teaching and how you got into performing and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. So that I'll just recap a little bit of that about the real book. It's, when you go to music school, as I did, and you study jazz, that book, for anybody who doesn't know, is I don't even have one here, but it's about, I don't know, an inch and a half thick, something like 400 pages, and it's pretty much every jazz song that you would ever want to play, and it can be great at a jam session if you don't know a lot of songs. I mean, that was really the purpose of it. For people showing up at a jam session or a gig and you don't know all the songs, oh, no problem. Here's a little one-page chart with the melody and the chords.
Yeah.
But the pitfall is that you never actually learn the songs and you just lug the book around everywhere. It's heavy. I had one of my students said, well, it's like a fire hazard bringing that thing around. It's just, anyway, as soon as I really got the light bulb went off, it's like the point of that book really is like kind of, in case of emergency, break glass.
Right.
You're not meant to lug it around everywhere. It's nice in the practice room. It's nice at a jam session. If you're playing with people you don't know very well, which happens in jazz, less common in some, maybe in rock bands or whatever, where you're more of a band. But in jazz, it's very common for people to get together that don't all know each other, so they don't all know the same song. So it can be a nice buoy in that situation. But if you take it with you everywhere you go, then you're missing the point, which is to actually learn all those songs. So a few years later, after that period in my life, I really made it my mission, and I started kind of I was living in San Francisco and I was playing a lot of duo gigs with singers where it's just voice and guitar. And I prided myself on being able to show up. There was one singer, some singers would have their own charts, but there was at least one, maybe two singers that called me regularly that they didn't have a book of charts. They just had a one-page sheet in 10-point type with all the songs that they sing with the key that they sing them in. No other information. And that's kind of the other end of needing a real book is oh, I don't need a real book. I can play for 2 or 3 hours just off the tunes that, that we know. So I don't know that I could do that now. I don't play standards as much as I did at a certain time in my life. But anyway, what I'm saying is, kids, learn the songs. Don't rely on the real book. Don't rely on your iPad. Just learn the songs and develop your ears so that if you do show up to a jam and they're playing a song that you don't know, maybe you can catch it the second or third time around. Like
Yeah.
that's great.
Yeah.
And then, gosh, I could pivot right into the book if you want, or I don't know. I don't
Absolutely.
want to take up all day here in the
I
room
know
either.
that this is your plan, and it, there's not any questions on, hey, do you prefer gold foil pickups versus, or is it germanium versus? It's none of that. It's just kind of a moving around, talking about the things that inspire, because and finding out maybe little gems that haven't been gotten to on an interview. But I don't have any pre-planned. It's just a,
Great.
a hang that can go anywhere.
I love it. I love it. Well, maybe I'll just stay in that time frame a little bit because it's a time
Yeah.
frame that I haven't really talked about a lot in other interviews. People often want to start with, how did you meet Nora Jones or how did you get that gig? And obviously that was a life-changing gig for me, and I don't mean to diminish it, but I wasn't 23 years old or whatever when that came around. I had already been playing a lot of gigs and doing a lot of things. So there was a period in the early 90s when I was living in San Francisco that was really formative for me. There's not a lot of evidence of it because at that time I wasn't quite yet playing on people's records. So people will just have to take my word for it. But, I was playing, as I said, a lot of gigs with singers. I always loved doing that. I always loved being an accompanist. I feel like that's
Yeah.
a beautiful thing to do on the guitar. And I also was playing with some singer-songwriters. Nobody really of note, but some really great singer-songwriters that people may just not know because they didn't go on to make big records. But so that was always in the mix for me. Like, one night I'd be at a jazz club playing somebody's original tunes, and then the next night, this is early '90s, living in San Francisco. The next night I'd be at a little French bistro playing jazz standards with a singer, and then the next night I'd be at a totally different kind of club playing somebody's original singer songwriter music, and I loved it. It was a lot of work, and believe it or not, San Francisco was fairly cheap.
Yeah.
Back then the tech boom, the first tech boom hadn't even happened yet. All of the kind of the first round of all the .com stuff hadn't even happened yet. So it was a cool time. And then as the '90s rolled on, this really creative music scene came around. Jenny Scheinman was living there. She's a violinist that people might know. Todd Sikafus, who did the orchestration for Hades Town and has been a composer, producer for a lot of years. He was there. I don't even know if people know these names, but there was just a really fertile
Yeah.
music scene. And then when that first .com boom happened, it was great because there was lots of young people with disposable income who were going out every night, and that just made it more possible to play more gigs in more, cool bars and yeah. So all of that was kind of the I, I guess the kind of origin story for me before I ever met, Nora Jones or even Tracy Chapman. The Tracy Chapman gig that I did for a year I met her in '95, and that just organically came out of living in the Bay Area, and we had friends in common, and my friend Charlie Hunter, the great jazz
Yeah.
guitarist, recommended me to Tracy, and that led to an audition, and that led to a gig. But I wouldn't have been able to play well enough to get that gig, or likewise to play with Nora later had there not been this kind of finishing school. I
Yeah.
went to music school right out of high school. I was like
Oh
17
wow.
or 18.
Yeah.
I was just this I didn't know anything, but I was trying. And so when I finished music school, I was still not even old enough to get into a bar, you know?
Yeah.
So that was all in Los Angeles where I grew up. And then I moved to San Francisco in '89 when I was 23. And that's really where I started to blossom because I was just working all the time doing all the kind of stuff I mentioned.
Yeah. Yeah, there's something very special about being coming up, doing things with singers as an accompanist, but bringing some of the jazz sensibility and shading vocals with voice leading and things like that, and just knowing how to create a pocket, but also some interesting colors and things like that. So that's a I don't hear I don't have a lot of conversations with guitar players about that, but I think it's one of the most incredible uh, training grounds for a guitarist to
Yeah.
to be sensitive to and try to enhance the vocal and the overall experience. So uh, anybody that's aspiring to be a sensitive accompanist, is there any advice that you would give them in terms of things that helped you when you were taking on these gigs? I would assume that you grew leaps and bounds just in doing it, but were there some early things that you kind of had to navigate through?
Mm-hmm. Uh, yeah. A couple things I would advise. Well, if your time is not really good, that would be something to work on because if you a lot of gigs that I would play with singer songwriters, of course, there is a rhythm section, and so you're not responsible for all keeping the time. But then sometimes there'll be one or two songs in the set that is just you and the singer, or for part of the song anyway, and you really need to be super duper solid, but also dynamic. Uh, the sweet spot I think is having time that somebody feels like they could lean against, like it's so solid that somebody could lean up against it like a big oak tree. But unlike a big oak tree, it needs to kind of, if you can imagine, like you're at a mixing desk and the singer is on one fader and the guitar is on the other fader, and there's just these subtle moves. It's not like this. It's just these little moves, and you learn to listen for where is there air, where space. Uh, you learn to tune into their phrasing, especially the time through a song where you don't really know how it goes. You you how to work on it other than just to be aware of it and then to try it yourself. But you know, do practice with a metronome, but at the same time, understand that the time being really solid doesn't have to mean that the dynamic
Right.
is static. Like timekeeping can be all there, but the shape of it, like yeah. Anyway, you know what I mean. So
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah.
stop there. But it's really important. It took me a while to figure that out. Early on, I thought, well, if I can keep solid time, that's the gig. But the more I worked with singers, the more I realized, well, no, that's not really the gig. In the same way that they wouldn't want a drummer who was just playing at one dynamic all the time, or anybody in the band. I mean, it's not just a guitar thing. That's just a music thing.
Yeah.
Music has to ebb and flow. Um, if you're a jazz oriented person, I would say uh, don't worry so much about all the inversions and stuff because that's what they, in music school or with any teacher, they're going to be asked to learn all the. Well, here's the drop two voicings, here's the drop three voicings, here's the drop two, drop three, here's all the inversions and all that stuff. And I love the sound of all that, but it is almost useless in a singer-songwriter situation. What is more useful is buy a capo, learn how to use a capo, and learn how to play beautifully in you know, it's almost more about learning to play the guitar the way the guitar is, like use open strings. There's a kind of a way that we learn in jazz school that gets us away from the guitar's nature, open strings and things ringing against each other. All the drop voicings, they're so beautiful, but in a way they kind of close the guitar down. So I've had a lot of students come to me over the years who were like, man, I just graduated from, I just got my degree in jazz guitar performance from wherever. And now my friend wants me to join their band and they're a singer songwriter. And I just have no idea
Right.
how to even approach that. So, try playing down in the open position. Get yourself a capo and learn to to open the guitar up.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing I admire about players like yourself or Bill Frisell or Jim Campolongo, that some of the voicings and just some of what you're describing, the open strings and hinting at a bass line and playing something, but chasing the melody and having that be the bearing the most fruit, but every once in a while dropping in hints at the bass line or hints at harmony, but just peppered in a very beautiful way. And it seems like there's a through line for players like yourself and Bill and Jim. There's this steeped knowledge of the idiom, the jazz, but really chasing after the beauty of melody and just trying to not overdo anything, but just everything in its proper place. And it's a very Zen-like pursuit.
Yeah, if you do that, I think you will be sought after as a guitar player. If you yourself can play melodically, and if you hear a song as melody and as a story rather than, oh, that's the song that goes G, B minor, C, G, E minor, you know, and and that's true in singer-songwriter world. It's just as true if you're playing something by George Gershwin or Cole Porter or whatever. To When you look at a chart in the real book or anywhere, you're just getting the most, like I said, kind of like in case of emergency, like this will get you through the song.
Right.
But music is melody, and songs are melody plus story. And those are the things that, the last things that a lot of guitar players come around to if you're in a studying situation. And if you have the melody of the song in your head, you can play things in response to it. You can kind of romance the melody. So where one option is you could just play the melody,
Right.
but you wouldn't do that if somebody's already singing it or playing it. But you should, whatever song you're playing, you should be able to play the melody. And then when somebody else is covering the melody, can you weave around that and play things that just make it all better? And it's easier said than done. I'm saying it like, well, there you go, kids. Just,
Right.
but it's a lifetime of study, and I don't even know. I can't even recommend like, oh, here's a book that will teach you melody or whatever. Like, if you want to learn melodies, how to play melodically on the guitar, play melodies. Like literally, just take a song that you like the melody of,
Yeah.
whatever it is, and play it. It's harder than it seems
Yeah.
I find for a lot of my students anyway. If you just say, oh yeah, play the melody of whatever song that they're into. And it can be humbling because it's like, oh, I know all my scales, and yet I can't play, somewhere over the rainbow without a lot of, fumbling around and, you know. So work on that stuff. Don't worry about scales and chords too much. You need them, but I think it's over. Jazz education overemphasizes some things that keep you busy if you're in a program, and there's semesters and semesters to go. But if you can play, your drop two, drop three voicings, and you can play melodies, I think you'll work. you know,
Right.
you know, if you want to. I mean, I know not everybody gets into guitar to work, but I'm
Yeah.
assuming some people want to.
Yeah. When you were coming up in Los Angeles, because we're essentially the same age, I would think that there's probably a lot of different things that you were listening to because being our age, there were fewer walls and fewer, categories to put it. Back in the day, AM radio was a cornucopia of different styles and, was there a direct path to jazz orientated stuff, or were you listening to blues or any other different styles before you ended up in a more jazz pursuit?
Sometimes when I look back, I know I overly simplify it, and I think, well, I was listening to the Beatles, and then I was listening to Monk, but that's not. I know that's not exactly what really happened, and part of why it's not as simple as that is just what you said, which was the radio. Like in the house, yes, we had a lot of Beatles records. My mom liked the Beatles. We had a couple of other cool records that my mom had. She had this Bill Withers record called Still Bill that I really loved. That has Used Me on it, and I think Lean on Me is also on that record.
Yeah.
So I was hearing that. She had Simon and Garfunkel Bridge Over Troubled Waters. She had a Cat Stevens record, and so I was listening to those things in the house, and then on the radio, uh, just pop music, Little River Band,
Oh yeah.
uh, you know, when disco started to happen, that was on the radio, and we got the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack, and I thought that was great. Like I never bought into the disco sucks thing. Like well, hey, there's they're good songs. The orchestration is really cool. Um, so I was listening to that, and then um, I would buy 45s. I remember I bought Robert Palmer, Doctor, Give Me the News. I
Uh,
thought that was really
Heck, yeah.
great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a great one.
So I would just, hear stuff on the radio and think, well, that's really cool. And, oh, the Doobie Brothers, cool. I'll go out and I'll buy the Doobie Brothers greatest hits. Oh, records weren't super expensive. And, I had a paper route, and, I could go to the store and at least buy a single. And then I started playing guitar when I was maybe 11 or 12 or something. And then some of my paper route money started going to buy Guitar Player magazine. And then that led me to a whole other world, because like there'd be some rock person on the cover. You'd have like, I don't know, Robin Trower on the cover or something like that. But then you'd get back to the lesson pages in the
Oh
back, and
yeah.
there'd be like Larry Coryell was doing a lesson, or there was this guy Herb Mickman who was really a
Oh
bass
yeah.
player, but he would do these jazz guitar lessons, and John Knowles would have lessons on fingerstyle stuff. And so because I didn't have a teacher, I was just so hungry to like learn stuff. So I would, I'd read the interviews with the rock guys, and occasionally there'd be somebody really cool on the cover. Like I remember when Ry Cooder was on the cover, um, and but that really opened my eyes, or my ears really, to like, oh, check out John Scofield. I was not hearing him on the radio. I was reading about him in Guitar Player magazine. Albert Lee I heard because I went into a record store and they were playing this Dave Edmunds record that Albert Lee plays on, Sweet Little Lisa. Um, it was just kind of everywhere. Gosh, you'd watch TV and you'd watch Hee Haw and you'd see Roy Clark play, and it would just be incredible, or you'd watch a variety show and you'd see Glenn Campbell play, or it was a interest. I was born in '66, so by '76, there's all through that time, lots of guitar on TV, lots of guitar on the radio.
Yeah.
Then disco happened, and guitar wasn't as important in disco. But then, not too long after that, the first Van Halen record came out, and then guitar was hot again, and then not too long after that, Night Ranger was on the radio or on MTV, and so all of that stuff was in the mix, and really, I guess I got into jazz in high school, a mixture of ways. One was that my stepdad was really into jazz, and he loved the Crusaders, so I heard a lot of Larry Carlton. Yeah, but then in high school, I joined the jazz band when I was a freshman, so whatever I was, like 14 or something, and most of the kids in the band were older. And they would be like, "Oh, you've never heard Thelonious Monk? You've never heard Miles Davis?" And I was like, "No, I just wanted to be in the jazz band because I thought it was cool, but I didn't know all the classic records." So the guys in the band would sometimes lend me LPs to check out, and that's how I started to get a bigger picture. Because other than that, I really just knew the Crusaders and a couple other things that my stepdad was into. But in high school, I started to get, there's like a timeline of 40s jazz sounds like this, and 50s jazz sounds like this, and these are the important people, and these are the important records, and stuff like that.
Yeah. It was, it's funny that talk about Guitar Player magazine, because it was one of those things where you might be excited to get I love every month getting that magazine because Alex Lifeson of Rush might be on the cover. However, there's a really funny article or a column by Tommy Tedesco.
Right.
Or Craig Anderton was talking about this, really something I could never build, but I thought, oh, that's fascinating. Or
yes.
And that's when I first got into the world of studio guitar players. And it was so fascinating because I thought, here are guys that can traverse the world of rock, guys, Larry Carlton, Jay Graydon, Lee Ritenour, Steve Lukather, but then also could play over sophisticated chord changes. Mm-hmm. I was hearing some harmonies even in pop solos. I was like, man, that doesn't sound pentatonic. That sounds really cool and outside or interesting, or just the way that they were phrasing. So it was a very dynamic time, pre-MTV, to get my fix of learning about guitar, because if it wasn't for those magazines or going to the music store on the weekends, I wouldn't be able to. I didn't have any family or friends that play guitar. So I wasn't able to see it in real time, but it was very exciting when you would discover a new player. I remember finding out about Holdsworth through Edward Van Halen, and then hearing that and going, "Oh my God!" So it just seemed like it was every week there was a new discovery, and the point to this whole thing was there was such a smorgasbord, it was hard to know where to go. It was like there's so many things, and you Ry Cooder on one hand and Paco de Lucia on the other hand, both amazing, but it seems like there was just so many choices, and I suspect that was kind of the same for you in high school, hearing all the different players. And
yeah. And so I would just kind of try to soak it all in. Like I never really was trying to copy any of those guys note for note, but all those, like that Friday Night Live in San Francisco record with Paco de Lucia and Al Di Meola and John McLaughlin, like that was a must-have record, and the first couple Van Halen records, and and then Holdsworth was happening, and not too long, around the same time, that first Eric Johnson record happened,
Oh,
and Steve Vai was, starting to be a name that people knew. And and then at the same time, like Barney Kessel was still, doing lots of stuff, like that was still happening. And as I mentioned, like Roy Clark and Chet Atkins and Jerry Reed. I didn't, when I was a kid, I never had that kind of like anxiety about it. It was just like, oh, wow, this is just amazing. Jeff Beck, I got really into the Blow by Blow record,
yeah.
And I somehow completely missed rock. Like, I didn't own a Led Zeppelin record or
Yeah.
a Rolling Stones record or anything. So in that way, I did kind of go from the Beatles to jazz, just in the sense that I know some people maybe start out with maybe the Beatles and then get into, rock proper. And I missed that. So I go back now and listen to stuff that you would think somebody my age who plays guitar, would know backwards and forwards, but I really don't. If I was at a party and a Led Zeppelin jam broke out, I could get through maybe 3 or 4 songs, and then I'd just be really faking it.
Right.
But there's just as much to learn there, and like, I think I was lucky that the teachers that I did have, I didn't have a teacher really in high school, but a little after that, I studied a little bit with a guy named Jimmy Weibel, and studied a little bit with Ted Green. And those guys were just really open. They never made me feel like, oh, it's embarrassing to like rock or blues or whatever. That's not what they were into necessarily, but they were very open.
Yeah.
And I did get into blues, but kind of also through my stepdad, because I had read about B.B. King in Guitar Player magazine, but I hadn't really heard him play. But then B.B. King made a record with the Crusaders.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so that was really when I started to hear him. It wasn't through like Live at the Regal or, Cook County Jail or, records that people know from earlier in his career. But so then I started to work backwards, and then I thought, oh, okay, well, there's B.B. King. Then one of my friends was like, oh, you got to check out Albert King. So I got Livewire Blues Power, and all of that stuff feels like related. I know that a lot of the like British, blues rock stuff came out of that stuff. The guys listening to Muddy Waters and guys listening to BB and Albert. But because I was coming more out of jazz, I sort of saw the family resemblance more between blues and jazz. Like, blues didn't necessarily lead to Paul Butterfield for me, or Mike Bloomfield, or even to the Yardbirds. Blues for me was like, oh, kind of leads to Charlie Christian or something.
Yeah, yeah. Or Kenny Burrell, or yeah.
Yeah, huge. Yeah.
And to me, Kenny was like the perfect blend. I remember going to this sought after jazz guru guitar player, and before we even got started, he handed me a cassette of Midnight Blue, and he said, "There's not much more I can say about this, but don't let this leave your cassette player in your car. Just absorb it, and it will demystify the whole thing, because you're coming from a blues background. It will demystify that whole jazz blues thing, because it will make you feel more at home, and it won't make you feel so inadequate. It will make you realize that the jazz is actually, it's doable, And then once we worked through that, then we went to Grant Green and some other players. But those were the two guys that made me go, thank goodness, because there's a local guitar player in our area named Scotty Anderson. I grew up in Cincinnati, and he was just the most technically amazing guitar player, playing double and triple stops and playing Caravan and all these amazing tunes. And in he was such a ferocious player that it just seemed like I have about as much chance of doing that than floating from mid court and doing a dunk, in basketball. It just seemed like I'll never. But those guys, Kenny Burrell and Grant Green, made it really accessible. And I thought, okay, these guys are speaking a language that we can all get.
Yeah. 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 That record, Midnight Blue, was kind of similarly for me. It was just like, oh, okay, I get it now. And funny enough, Wes also, but like I didn't hear the early Wes records until later. The first Wes record I heard was California Dreamin'.
Yeah.
And so that's very accessible. All that stuff kind of towards the later part of his career. It's just about melody, and it's it just feels so good to hear him play. That a day in the life record is really great. All the later stuff, which isn't necessarily the stuff that people talk about with Wes, but it's just distilled like. Here it is. It's right there. Like, it sounds great. It's tuneful. It's melodic. We've been talking about melody. I want to take a kind of a twist and go back to this early '90s period, because you had asked me at the beginning of our conversation about the book that's over my shoulder, String Theories, and in a way, it started, believe it or not, in the early '90s. Because when I first moved to San Francisco, I actually moved there in '89. I was never, at that time, and still am not, a real hustler of gigs. Like, I'm sociable, but I'm kind of an introvert. I don't, I'm not great at just like doing the hustle. But I moved to San Francisco, and I thought, okay, I don't know anybody here. If I don't go out and go to jam sessions and start being on the scene, nothing will ever happen. Because at least in LA, I knew people. I grew up there. When I moved to San Francisco, just my girlfriend got accepted to school up north, and so I was following her. It wasn't like a career choice. But now I'm in this city that has a ton of music, and I don't know anybody. So I started going to jam sessions, and one of the first jam sessions I went to, I met a guitar player who sounded great. His name was Paul Musavi, a real serious jazz guy. And after the jam session, he said, "Hey man, do you teach?" And I was like, "I do, but you don't need any guitar lessons from me." He's like, "No, man. A friend of mine is teaching at this music school, and he's leaving, and they're looking for somebody, and he's got like 3 full days of students. And if you're looking for work and you like to teach, it would be, for somebody that would be a great opportunity."
Oh, yeah.
So I went and I talked to the director the next day on the recommendation of this guy, Paul Musavi. And next thing I knew, I had this teaching gig, which was great, because before that I was like working at a newspaper doing advertising just to pay the rent. And now I could work, instead of 5 days a week, I could work 3 days a week, all having to do with music. And then at the school, I met the bass teacher, I met the drum teacher, I met the piano teacher, and they're all working musicians. And so it'd be like, "Hey, you want to do a blues gig this weekend? We need a guitar player." Sure. So all of a sudden, I'm networking without even trying to. I'm just around other working musicians, So that showed me I hadn't ever done that much teaching, but I actually loved it. And so that has always been an element of what I'm doing, as far as what I'm doing creatively, and also how I, pay the rent. And a few years later, Guitar Player magazine, which was at that time based in San Mateo, just south of San Francisco, had a big turnover. Three of the big editors there left, and they were looking for somebody to come on board, and specifically to do a lot of the lesson stuff. And I had freelance. I had done some writing for Guitar Player, some lesson stuff. And then next thing I knew, I wasn't officially the lessons editor, but functionally that's what I was doing there. So again, the teaching part of my life became something essential. It wasn't just a side thing, but it was a full-time job. And then fast forward a little bit, I got the Nora Jones gig around 2001 or 2 or something, and then I wasn't teaching because I was just on the road, but in 2013 or 14, it hit me that YouTube was this kind of open platform that you could just upload stuff to. So I started uploading little lessons, nothing crazy, not like, modes of the melodic minor or anything particularly, advanced, but just like, hey, I've been doing this for a while. Here's some stuff I've learned. I'm glad to share it with you. Little things, like, simple things. And then I kept doing it. And then I kept doing it, and I kept doing it, and I kept doing it, and kept doing it, and then kept doing it. And, years went by. And then I had a lot of lessons there. And maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I was having coffee with my friend Ethan Sherman, a really amazing guitar player in LA. And I said, I think I want to write a book. We were talking about the Mick Goodrick book, The Advancing Guitarist.
Yeah. Right.
And I thought, I didn't think I was going to write anything as that, because that's a real, that's a lifetime of work, that book.
Yes.
If people don't know it, get yourself that book, The Advancing Guitarist by Mick Goodrick. It's funny and serious, and there's a bunch of exercises in it that I still do. I don't even have a copy of the book anymore, but I just know them. And there's also lots of pages at the back that are just thought-provoking, about all kinds of stuff that you get into in a life in music. And so I wanted to kind of write a book that was like the back pages of the Mick Goodrick book. Not so much exercises, but just stuff to... And I mentioned this to my friend Ethan, and he said, well, I think you've already written the book. I said, what do you mean I've already written the book? He said, well, you've got all these YouTube videos. I bet we could just, transcribe some of the things that you said in the videos and reformat them a little bit so they make more sense on the page. And I was like, really? So we started doing that. And then Ethan said, well, could I write a chapter? I said, yeah, sure. So it became more collaborative, and we went back and forth over like a year or two, and changed the order of things, changed the format, worked with one editor, worked with a different editor, and eventually it became this book that I don't even have a hard copy of, but you can see it's in the frame. It's this green book in the frame. And so we released that maybe a year ago. It's called String Theories. And now what's new is that it's now available as an audio book. Ethan and I went in the studio and recorded the whole book, as well as some guitar playing, not the exercises so much as just interstitial music. We just had a good time, like framing the chapters with music, some of it written, some of it improvised. And so that's brand new in the world as of this week, is people can listen to the audio book.
Yeah.
And I think that's a cool format for it. I mean, our original vision was it would be a book that you would either keep in your, in your gig bag or have on your music stand, and it would be a companion that you could keep coming back to in the same way that I did keep going back to that Mick Goodrick book for a lot of years. And but it's 2025 and audiobooks are cool. People are,
Oh yeah.
you know, you can't write in the margins of an audiobook, but you can take it with you anywhere, on the subway, at the gym, at the supermarket, wherever. So that's yeah. So in a roundabout way, those early years in San Francisco taught me that teaching. They showed me that teaching is something that I have a knack for, and also really, have a passion for. And even though I'm, so half of my life is I'm teaching, half of my life is I'm playing.
Yeah, that's a beautiful example of how you followed the thing that followed your bliss, the thing that felt the most natural.
Right.
And yeah, the things that I've learned from you as a longtime Guitar Player magazine subscriber up until this last episode, which broke my heart, by the way, the idea of not having a physical Guitar Player magazine is just. All that being said, is I've always enjoyed the things that you've talked about in the columns, and then the videos that sometimes you just resonate with somebody's personality and their style and the way that they deliver it. That's the great thing about YouTube. You can find the people that have your demeanor, and you and also a guy that lives here, I suspect not far from where I live, Eric Haugen.
Oh, Eric is great.
He has a very similar demeanor, which I love.
Yeah, he's like my rock and roll brother. Yeah, I love his temperament. He's a great teacher and a great player. Yeah.
So, what do you have coming up exciting to share with, as far as any live dates? I know you're performing with, is it Rich Hinman?
Yeah. I have a band with Rich Hinman. He's a pedal steel player, and he lives in Boston, well, outside of Boston, but I live in New York. He's there. We don't get to play a ton because we live in different cities, and he's busy. He's a professor at Berkeley, and but we do try to play. Every other month or so we'll play a gig, and we've been playing together for many, many, many years. We have an instrumental thing that's kind of a little bit country, a little bit jazz, a little bit boogaloo, a little bit of just everything. And so, yeah, we're playing. We've got a gig coming up outside of Boston in Cambridge. We're playing at Lizard Lounge at the end of February. And we put out our second record last year. We're already trying to figure out how to make our next record. It's really fun to play with Rich and really inspiring. So that's coming up. I've got a couple of trio gigs in New York. I have kind of different iterations of rhythm sections that I play with, but most recently I've been playing with a drummer named Kenny Wallison,
Okay.
who's amazing, who plays a lot with Bill Frisell. I knew Kenny. He was my neighbor when I lived in San Francisco in the early 90s. Yeah. So we're playing a couple of dates with Vicente Archer on bass that people might know. He's been playing with Schofield lately, and he's an incredible New York bass player. So I've got a couple of dates with that trio. And then I work with a singer named Liz Wright.
Yeah.
And we're going to go to Europe in March. And then we've got a couple of kind of one-off dates throughout the summer. And then we've got another European tour in the fall. And I'll be teaching at a couple of guitar camps this summer. I'm teaching at a jazz camp in California called Jazz Camp West. That's a really great camp. And I'm teaching at the Swananoa Gathering in North Carolina. And yeah, I mean, it's going to be a busy year for me. But in the immediate future, playing with Rich Hinman, playing with Liz Wright, playing with my own trio. Yeah.
Yeah. I always, I don't, like I said, I don't have a ton of questions, like interview style questions. I like it to just kind of take on its own life. But I always like to find out if there's any recordings that maybe you've stumbled upon recently or rediscovered that you would recommend to a friend or to anybody listening. Hey, these are something that the good thing about being our age is there's still so many things that we've missed from the past, and we find this something that came out in '66 and was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing, or maybe even something that came out a few years ago. So if there's anything that listeners might be wise to check out, that one or two or whatever you think.
Yeah. What have I been listening to? I've been I got into Thad Jones through, well, what happened was I rediscovered a record that I loved in the 90s, which was a Hank Jones record that's shoot, the name is escaping me, but it's a trio record with Elvin Jones, his brother, and George Mraz on bass. And this was a record that in the 90s I listened to incessantly, just all the time. And it's a record of all tunes by Thad Jones, who is the third brother in that. Hank Jones played piano, Thad Jones played trumpet and cornet, and Elvin was the drummer. So through that, I've been just kind of randomly going and looking up Thad Jones records, and discovered there's a really great one. I think it's his first record, and there's a bonus track that's only available now. It wasn't on the original record. That's just a duet with Thad Jones playing trumpet and Kenny Burrell playing guitar.
Oh wow!
And the song, people should look it up if you have Spotify, you can find it. It's called "Something to Remember You By." And it's really beautiful. It's in A flat, and Kenny Burrell tunes his guitar down a half step so he can play.
Nice.
You know, it's almost like using a capo, but it's a negative capo. You know.
Yeah, in reverse. Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah, and so you get this beautiful Kenny Burrell. It's just Kenny Burrell playing with a trumpet player and playing a ballad, and it's incredible. So the song is called "Something to Remember You By," and it's on the name of the Thad Jones record. I can't remember, but it's something like, you know, The Incredible Thad Jones or something like that. Yeah. And then now I do remember the name of the Hank Jones record. It's called Upon Reflection. So I've been listening to that a ton lately and trying to learn some of those tunes, learn some of Hank's arrangement of Thad's tunes. That's the stuff that I've been listening to most recently.
Yeah, wonderful. That's wonderful food, because invariably when you get those little nuggets, you get that, but then you do a little bit more research, and it takes you off in a whole new trajectory. And not long after that, you kind of go, oh my gosh, that one little seed led me into this whole different area. That's why I'm always fascinated to hear ideas of things that I may have missed along the way.
Yeah. How about you? What have you been listening to?
Most recently, I got into a progressive rock. I mean, I perform with a Pink Floyd tribute group, so I'm constantly doing the Pink Floyd thing. But I rediscovered "Trespass" by Genesis. It came out in the early set, and it's just very English, very very quintessential Mellotron, and kind of, you know, very very British prog. As far as it's funny because I did rediscover the actual cassette for or not Kind of Blue, but for Midnight Blue, and I remember the guitar instructor was teaching at the University of Dayton. A great guy named Jim Smith gave me the cassette, and I remember finding it and just thinking about him, and it kind of rekindled my love for that record.
Wow, that's amazing to have a physical artifact from all the way back then.
Yeah, I don't have anything to play it on, but
So you grew up in Dayton?
I grew up in Cincinnati, but I took the And I think Jim was great. He passed away a few years ago. Just great guy, just a warm, humble, wonderful player. But I would drive up to Dayton and
I see.
take a few lessons. But it was it reminded me when I read an interview with Larry Carlton talking about taking his first lesson with Joe Pass. And he realized that the first lesson, I'm paraphrasing, was he wasn't quite ready to get all that he could from Joe. So he kind of needed to take some time away and then come back. And then what Joe had to offer was a lot more poignant and applicable. Because I think maybe he had a lesson with Joe when he was very young. But and that was the case for me. I was kind of a rock and roll guy at the time, and I was finding out about jazz, and they said, if you have an interest, go to see this guy. And I went, and I was like, I really have some serious holes in my knowledge that it would be nice to understand the vernacular a little bit better. So all that to say, those two recordings are an old Genesis record called Trespass, and then being reacquainted with the physical cassette of Midnight Blue.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, there's it's funny, I'll mention one other record that I'm going to have to cheat and look up the name of. But when I was recently visiting a friend of mine down in Nashville, and he was listening to this Kenny Burrell record that I'd never seen before that was a little bit later than Midnight Blue. It was kind of, I'm going to cheat and look it up here. Hope I'm not. Hope it's not a party foul to do that.
Oh, good.
Oh man, it's gonna be one that you might go, oh yeah, everybody knows this record, but I didn't know it. I can't even find it. The name of it is something like, kind of like the Now scene or whatever. There's like the picture on the cover isn't Kenny Burrell. It's sort of like a prototypical kind of Greenwich Village looking kid with a cap on, maybe with some buttons on the cap. And it's a slightly later record, and it's just really tuneful. Great arrangements, kind of orchestrated. Not unlike the Wes stuff I was talking about. Like, if you had asked me that question 6 months ago, I would have said I was listening to Wes A Day in the Life.
Yeah.
And like just basically listening to the last 2 or 3 Wes records, because I'd never gotten around to them, and listening to them now, they sound so fantastic. Yeah. It's not about all the fire of Full House or just the perfection, like Boss guitar is just like perfect playing, but this is like a grown-up dude playing melodies with this great orchestration, and this Kenny Burrell record is kind of like that too.
Is it called Now See Who You Are?
No. But that's something I would like to do, when I grow up. Like Nels Cline made a record a couple years ago called Lovers with a beautiful orchestration by Michael Leonhardt. And I would love to do something like that, just once, to get to play guitar and be surrounded by, woodwinds and strings, and not in a cheesy Muzak-y way, but just in a really, like if I could hire Klaus Okerman to do the orchestration or something really cool like that, This
has been fantastic. Everything that you would ever want to have, it's nice to meet your heroes,
Man. Well, thank you for having me. This has been a great conversation. I really appreciate your great energy and curiosity, and really, really a pleasure.
Wonderful. I hope you have a great weekend.
Thank you for tuning into the Guitar Hang Podcast. That's a wrap for today's episode. Huge thanks to Adam Levy for joining us, sharing his incredible insights, and of course, big thanks to you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to click subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, and leave a review.